In 1918, Anastasia Romanov, the youngest daughter of Tsar Nicholas II, was believed to have perished with her family in one of Russia's most brutal royal tragedies. But what if she survived? What if the princess, thought to be lost forever, lived on in secrecy for decades, her identity hidden by a world torn apart by war and betrayal? This is the disturbing and twisted case of Anastasia Romanov, one of the most enduring mysteries in history. Anastasia was born in 1901, the youngest of 5 children of Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra. The Romanovs were a beloved family, with the Tsar ruling over the Russian Empire in a time of great power and wealth. But in 1917, revolution swept through Russia. The Romanov dynasty was overthrown, and the family was placed under house arrest. Their once glamorous lives were reduced to captivity, and their future looked increasingly uncertain. As the revolution raged, the royal family was seen as symbols of the old order, and their downfall seemed inevitable. On July 17, 1918, Anastasia and her entire family were executed by Bolshevik soldiers in the city of Yekaterinburg. The Tsar, his wife, their 5 children, and their servants were brutally shot in a basement by their captors, ending the reign of one of Russia's most prominent royal families. The bodies were hidden, and the world was told that the Romanovs had been eliminated in a single violent act. However, questions about Anastasia's fate began almost immediately. In the aftermath, rumors began to spread, whispers of a surviving Romanov daughter, someone who had managed to escape the massacre. Some claimed that Anastasia had survived the shooting, her body either hidden or misidentified. Others speculated that she had been smuggled out of the execution chamber by loyalists or sympathizers who wanted to protect the last surviving member of the imperial family. These rumors became even more widespread as the years went by, with new theories and testimonies emerging from people who claimed to have seen Anastasia alive. The most significant claim came from Anna Anderson, a woman who appeared in Germany in the early 1920s and asserted that she was Anastasia Romanov. Anderson's story was widely accepted by some, and she became a public figure, the center of attention for those still hopeful that Anastasia had survived. Anderson's story resonated with people who wanted to believe that the young princess had made it out alive. She gave details of the Romanov family's life that seemed to fit, but doubts about her authenticity remained. For decades, Anna Anderson fought to be recognized as Anastasia, enduring public scrutiny and media attention. But as her story grew, so did the skepticism. Could it be true? Was she the lost princess of Russia? Or was she simply a woman trapped in a delusion that grew stronger with time? The mystery of Anastasia Romanov remained an open wound in history, one that the world could not quite heal, and people could not stop talking about. As the years went by, the mystery surrounding Anastasia Romanov's disappearance only deepened. The rumors of her survival didn't fade. Instead, they grew more elaborate. People were desperate for answers, and the idea that Anastasia might still be alive became more plausible to some. Her family, including surviving relatives, friends, and even some Russian royalists, couldn't help but wonder if perhaps she had somehow escaped the massacre. The initial silence from the Romanovs' relatives only fueled more speculation. Could it be possible that Anastasia had been hidden away by someone who wanted to protect her, or that she had been smuggled to safety under the cover of darkness? The theories continued to evolve. Anna Anderson, who had claimed to be Anastasia, began to gather a following. She was not just a mysterious woman living in Germany. Her story of survival started to sound more believable. She was seen as a symbol of hope, the one person who could potentially unlock the mystery that had haunted the Romanov family's legacy for years. Anderson herself was mentally and physically frail, often displaying signs of trauma. Yet, as she continued to share her story, people started to believe that she was indeed the lost princess. She showed knowledge of private details about the Romanov family, and some of her mannerisms matched those of the real Anastasia. The resemblance, at least to some, was striking, but even as more people came to her defense, there were still questions about the authenticity of her claim. Despite her growing following, the world was not so easily convinced. There were those who believed Anna Anderson was merely a woman caught in a tragic delusion, and that her claims were nothing more than a desperate attempt to claim an identity that wasn't hers. The Russian royal family had their doubts too. In the early 1920s, they had already lost their beloved Tsar Nicholas II and his family, and now they had to deal with this new mystery. The Romanovs did not publicly embrace Anna Anderson's claim, but they privately investigated her background. They wanted to know if she truly was Anastasia, or if she was simply another victim of an unimaginable tragedy. The doubts were enough to keep the case unresolved, even as Anderson's popularity continued to grow. By the 1950s, Anna Anderson's name was already synonymous with Anastasia Romanov in the eyes of many. She had appeared on the front pages of newspapers, and there was constant speculation about her identity. DNA testing, which could have provided some clarity, was still decades away, so the question remained open. Could this woman truly be the lost Romanov princess? Her claims to be Anastasia Romanov were still unverified, and some believed that Anderson was simply trying to convince herself, and others that she was someone she wasn't. The press often portrayed her as the tragic figure who had survived the Bolshevik massacre, adding another layer to her mysterious allure. In 2007, nearly 90 years after the execution, a breakthrough would finally answer the question of who the woman claiming to be Anastasia really was. The Russian government had long been reluctant to deal with the Romanov mystery, but the case was once again thrust into the spotlight when a group of scientists in Russia worked to exhume the remains of the Romanov family. In that year, the remains of the Romanov family, including Tsar Nicholas II, Tsarina Alexandra, and their children, were recovered from a mass grave, along with the remains of their servants. Among the remains, the body of Anastasia was believed to be missing. However, in a surprising twist, DNA testing on the remains revealed a shocking discovery. The Romanov family was complete. Anastasia Romanov was not among the missing bones. She had never survived the execution, as many had hoped. The remains of the Romanov family were now identified, and a DNA test confirmed what had been assumed for decades. Anastasia, like the rest of her family, had been executed that night in 1918. Yet despite the DNA evidence, the belief that Anastasia may have survived did not fade entirely. People still held on to the story of Anna Anderson, believing that she could be the last hope for the Romanov legacy. Anderson's story would be cemented in history as a symbol of perseverance, though it remained unclear whether she was truly Anastasia or simply a woman who believed she was. Even though science had provided answers, the mystery of Anastasia's fate lived on in the hearts and minds of many who continued to hope for her miraculous return. As the years continued to pass, Anastasia Romanov's story became more than just a search for a lost princess. It became a symbol of unresolved grief and a cultural myth. Even after the DNA results of 2007 confirmed that Anastasia had perished with her family, the desire for closure remained. The world wasn't ready to let go of the mystery, and some still held on to the idea that Anastasia could have survived. These theories persisted despite the definitive scientific proof. People continued to wonder, what if the execution was faked? What if Anastasia was smuggled away and lived a hidden life? For many, the idea of Anastasia surviving represented something more than a mere mystery. It symbolized the hope of redemption for the lost Russian monarchy, a final chance to preserve a piece of its legacy. The Romanovs had been symbols of Russian power and grandeur, and their brutal execution had marked the end of an era. Anastasia, the youngest of Tsar Nicholas II's children, represented the last vestige of hope, and her survival was seen as a way to keep that hope alive. Yet, as time went on, the idea of Anastasia's survival became less about finding the truth and more about the emotional fulfillment of a story that many wanted to believe. In some ways, the myth of Anastasia was stronger than the actual facts of her death. People were emotionally attached to the idea of a surviving princess who who could somehow return to reclaim her rightful place in history. The emotional connection to this myth was so deep that it overshadowed the reality of the DNA results. Anastasia's legacy, whether through myth or fact, had become untouchable, a story that was larger than the actual events. For those who believed Anna Anderson's claim, the story was about faith in the impossible. Anderson's persistence, her ability to convince others that she was the lost Romanov princess, created a narrative of survival that resonated with many. To some, her suffering was proof enough of her legitimacy. Anna Anderson's life became a tragic tale of someone who had been so consumed by the hope of returning to royalty that she spent her entire life battling for a crown that may not have been hers to claim. The story of her struggle and eventual death in 1984 became part of the larger Romanov myth, a tale of perseverance in the face of unimaginable loss. However, as the decades wore on and the world changed, the case of Anastasia Romanov shifted from a mystery to a myth. It wasn't just about solving the puzzle, it was about keeping the legacy alive, and in doing so, it had become a timeless story that was retold and reshaped with each generation. The fascination with Anastasia wasn't just about finding the truth, it was about the hope for survival amidst tragedy, and about the human need to hold on to something from the past. As history moved forward, the story of Anastasia Romanov, the princess lost to time, would remain a powerful reflection of hope, loss, and the complexities of history. In the wake of the final DNA revelations, many assumed the mystery of Anastasia's survival had been laid to rest, but the emotional aftermath lingered. The Romanov case wasn't just a historical tragedy, it had become a cultural touchstone, a symbol of the ways in which history shapes the present. The legacy of Anastasia would never fully disappear, as her story continued to intrigue and inspire future generations. Over the years, numerous books, documentaries, and even movies have been created about her life and mysterious death. Her image, frozen in time as the lost princess, remained a haunting symbol of the Romanov legacy. Even though the mystery was solved through science, the cultural fascination with her survival continued to thrive, keeping her name alive in the public's consciousness. Anastasia Romanov's story served as a reminder of the fragility of power, the brutality of revolution, and the complex ways in which the public clings to hope in the face of devastating loss. The story of her potential survival was one that could never truly be resolved because it spoke to the human need for resolution and closure in a world where sometimes there are no answers. Her life, however short and tragic, became a part of history's twisted fabric, a symbol of everything lost and everything that could never be regained. As we reflect on Anastasia's fate, we're left to wonder, what is the true cost of a royal legacy? And how do we preserve the memories of those lost to time? As the years went by and the final answers were laid out, Anastasia Romanov's story became a symbol not only of the lost royalty of Russia, but of the tragic consequences of revolution and the elusive nature of truth. The DNA testing in 2007 had put to rest the doubts about her survival, but it did little to quell the lingering fascination with the Romanovs and their legacy. What remained was a story of lost hope, of a family that was once at the pinnacle of Russian society, now erased in a brutal moment of history. But Anastasia's fate, though determined by science, continued to resonate on an emotional level. Her legacy as a lost princess would remain ingrained in the public consciousness. The Romanovs represented the end of an era in Russia, a monarchy that had ruled for centuries, only to be torn down by a revolution that changed the course of the nation. The family, particularly Anastasia, became more than historical figures. They became symbols of innocence lost in the wake of political upheaval. Their tragic deaths were not just a loss for Russia, but for the world, as they marked the end of imperial power and a transition into a world ruled by forces unknown at the time. In many ways, Anastasia's story highlights the universal theme of identity and survival. Who was she beyond the image of the lost princess, how did the world see her? Through the lens of history, or as a person, a human being who experienced unimaginable trauma and loss? These questions remained unanswered. Anastasia's story became one of lost potential, a young woman who had the world at her feet, only to have it stripped away in an instant. For some, the myth of survival was comforting, an enduring tale that symbolized hope, even in the darkest of times. For others, the scientific truth was a harsh reality, a stark reminder of the brutality of history and the fragility of life. Despite the official records, the fascination with the Romanovs never truly faded. The questions about Anastasia's fate, whether she survived or not, still linger in the minds of many, and her story continues to inspire countless films, books, documentaries, and articles. The mythic quality of her life and death, and the enduring mystery of what could have been, made her a figure that transcended time. She became a symbol of the royal tragedy that forever shaped Russia and the world's perception of monarchies. The mystery surrounding Anastasia also shows the power of mythology in shaping cultural narratives. While science may have confirmed the truth, the emotional need for something larger than life kept Anastasia alive in the hearts of millions. Her story became about more than the quest for answers. It became about the hope for something enduring, something pure amid the chaos of the revolution and the upheaval of centuries of monarchy. The Romanovs, and Anastasia in particular, became more than historical figures. They became symbols of everything lost and the enduring human desire to preserve legacy. Anastasia's case ultimately asks us all to reflect on the way we tell stories, about truth, about loss, and about what we hold on to when everything else seems gone. Her story, while rooted in the past, lives on as a cautionary tale and as a reminder that some mysteries are not just solved through facts. They remain a part of our collective imagination, forever intertwined with history, myth, and the hope that one day the pieces of the puzzle might come together. Do you think Anastasia survived? Share your thoughts in the comments below.